You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? I'm a human being, god damn it! My life has value! It's time to ask yourself what you believe.
Mass murder, torture, perjury, embezzlement, fraud, deception, treason. These are just a few of your many crimes against humanity. You will not win this war, for you are fighting the very essence of humanity.
Hi, welcome to Truth or Talk. I'm April Bowden.
And I'm Virstyne Henry.
You can check out our website at truthertalk.com, find our Conspiracy Realist t-shirt, and the book that we have available right now is Liam Sheff's book, Official Stories, which is a very good book, and talks about the official stories are there to protect the officials. So it's a good book. Liam's working on a new book, so it'll be good when that comes out too. I imagine that he's funny. He's a good writer, and he has a good wit, so we're looking forward to that. But please check out our website.
He's very informative, too.
He is. But he does it in a funny way. I mean, he has a sense of humor, and he's very, like, sarcastic, and he's just, but,
well, what is that?
Also, like, huh?
What is that? Is it the Oscar Wilde quote that says if you teach people the truth, you gotta, was it Oscar Wilde that said that? That you got to make it funny or they'll kill you? Something.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the exact quote.
Oh, right, yeah.
But he does that beautifully. He teaches truth, and he's very well-researched, but he also has an incredible wit. So when you're reading the stuff, it reads very, it's easy to absorb. It reads very smoothly, I thought, so.
Yeah, exactly. It reads very, very smoothly. I haven't met anybody who I've given that book to or who's bought that book from us who didn't really, really like it.
Yeah.
I gave it to somebody, and she was like, "Oh my God, I read that thing in 3 days. It was so good." And she was really awake and didn't really need, you know what I mean? She knew a lot of that stuff already, but because it was so entertaining, and then even if you already know it, you kind of get, you still get something out of it.
Yeah.
And the way that he dissects, I think, the official stories is really, and shows you how each one has kind of a commonality, and it's there, whether it be like JFK to HIV testing, or who really wrote Shakespeare's plays. It's like you would think that those things wouldn't have anything in common, but then he finds a way to show you how they each kind of do. Because as we've talked, the official before, like with the Hegelian dialectic and things like that, the official narratives hardly ever change, really.
Yeah. Yeah. They use the same script.
It's exactly the same script repeated over and over and over again, and it's effective. It works. It blinds people to the truth, But it's just funny how he does it, and it connects those things which you wouldn't think would be easy to connect, but he does, and it works. So today we're going to do another show on health. We have my friend Deborah Merlin on today. She wrote a book about how she used holistic healing methods to recover her 2 boys from severe ADHD. Now, there's been some controversy about whether ADHD is a real disorder or not. I'd say, read her book, and you can see the experiences that she went through with her sons, because she had twin boys, and they were both disabled or had learning disabilities and some neurological issues and some tics and things like that, and eventually diagnosed with ADHD. Now, I would say read her book, and you can't deny that there was an issue, that this wasn't like normal behavior, and that that these kids were struggling with their learning, they were struggling with their attention, they were struggling with, and it wasn't just because they were hyperactive. They really couldn't focus. Like, it just, And in some cases, we're having a lot of trouble learning, having a lot of trouble in school, very, very, very developmentally delayed in a lot of areas. So I think that the DSM does a disservice to people because it labels them and, with something like ADHD, and that doesn't really tell you the full story. It's not to say that there is no such thing as ADHD. It's just to say that it's not. It's such a compartmentalized thing, and it doesn't mean what they say it means, really. Yeah. Because what really happened was, her sons were highly toxic. She goes in through. She had to figure it all out. They were premature. They were, and she'll tell more of the stories. We want her to give her. Obviously, she went through it, so we want to have her talk about it, and it's in her book as well. But it was like basically. You come into the world toxic, you get vaccinated, more toxins, you're not eating the right foods, you're doing all these things, and then you start to get sick, and then it shows in you're a child, and it shows in your behavior, and then they label you with a mental disorder, but it's not necessarily irreversible, and it's not, and that's such a compartmentalized look at what it really is, Yeah. They want to this is the problem, this is the drug to fix it. So, because I guess I don't know if this is true or not. I didn't really follow this too much, but did you hear about this where the guy who they say invented ADHD later on said that he did that so that he could sell drugs? Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about that at all.
Yeah, so he apparently
I'm not surprised
later.
Though.
Right.
nothing surprised me.
Right. I know, it's crazy. So later he admitted that he manufactured it, but I'd say, but I don't think that it's, I mean, I've seen kids that have ADHD or have been diagnosed with ADHD, and they do have issues. You probably have too as a teacher. You're like, yeah that kid's got some, it's not just that he wants to go outside and play. It's that there's something going on.
But I also, I would say, too, the structure, the classroom environment, too, I think contributes to that, too, because they're kids that I think they're just brilliant kids, and they're fucking over having to sit and watch a 6-hour lecture, So, I think it's both. I think it's the toxins in the environment, and I think it's the, the diet, that they eat, because I noticed, too, when I remember, too, I was talking to my cousin's a teacher as well, and we were talking about one day, and this is before I was, hip to all of this stuff that I know now, but you were just talking about how after lunch, a lot of the kids come in, and they were just crazy,
Yeah.
Because of the terrible food that they're eating, We're like, it has to be the food, because they're just I don't know, when they come back, it's insane. So anyway, and I've had this conversation with a few other teachers too.
Right, exactly. I've seen that as well, even in my own kids. And I think I've mentioned this before. My son Aiden, before we took him off the wheat, when he was really little, I want to say he was 2.5, because he's been off it since he's 3. He would get. He would eat it, and he would get a look in his eye that was sort of as if somebody who was on drugs,
glassy.
Would get dilated.
Oh, yeah, like that hazed over look.
Not only that, but they would literally dilate, he was on drugs. And he would start to kind of be in his own world and be very stimmy and stuff. And this type of behavior is often written off as, well, he's autistic. So, so that's where I'm saying is he autistic? Yeah, I guess you could call it that, but does that really tell you that he has a wheat allergy?
Yeah.
It doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Or that that it's a GMO wheat or something, that it's toxic and it's toxic to him, and so it doesn't really give you that. It sort of dismisses what's really going on, and so that's where I don't really like these labels. Yeah. They're really just for, I think we mentioned on a different show. Before, I don't know if, can't remember which show it was, but we were talking about the DSM. We talked about how, it's really for the insurance companies. It doesn't really have anything to do with the real world, There was, there's been, I guess Jenny McCarthy had said on her show that her son is he's in summer camp, and he's being bullied by some other kids, but because of his autism, he doesn't pick up on social cues, so he doesn't realize it. So, so everybody's saying, oh, it's so sad, but a lot of people were bringing up the fact, they go, well, I thought that her son was recovered from autism. And so what I keep bringing up to them is like, well, no, her son was considered off the spectrum according to the DSM, to the diagnostic criteria. That doesn't have anything to do with the real world. Yeah. It just means that he, according to their definition of what autism is, doesn't have it. That doesn't mean he doesn't still have autistic, tendencies, or there isn't still things that are present that would resemble autism. So it's like they're very. It doesn't have anything to do with that at all. He still has seizures. He's still epileptic. He still has a lot of issues that that he's working on. He's dealing with, and I think he's 12 or 13 by now. So he may struggle forever. He may, come out of it completely, but it's to be determined at this point because he's only 12. But he's very cute, very sweet boy, and yeah. So I think I met him like once or twice. He's a cutie.
What is your definition of autism?
I can explain exactly what it is.
Okay.
Autism is what happens is that something causes a misfiring in the part of the brain known as praxis. This is where we have our motor planning skills. Now, motor planning is what you do, what your brain's signal to your body to do whatever it needs to do. So when, for example, if you're hungry, the brain sends a signal to your stomach says, okay, go into the kitchen, cook some food, it's all of that. And so when you start off in life, those feelings are very primitive. So if you're a baby, you don't know how to cook yourself some food. You don't have the ability to do that yet. You haven't developed the physicality or the body or the mind or any of that to do that yet. So you cry because then someone will bring it to you. So this is how communication starts. That's motor planning. You need that in order to understand what your needs are. You have to understand how to communicate those. So that's one form of motor plan. There's many, many forms. It's also like, for example, driving your car every day. It requires a lot of motor planning. Your brain has to, know how to get in, open the door, how to get in, how to sit down, how to put the key in the ignition, how to start it up, how to, all of that. And then when you're out on the road, you have to be very aware of the things around you. It's a very dynamic situation where there's all kinds of unknown scenarios that could come up. A dog could run in front of you. You could get a stick thrown at your windshield. You have to be able to react to those quickly, right? Mm-hmm. Or else you're going to get into an accident and you could get hurt. And your motor planning, your dynamic thinking might fail you, and you might get hurt anyway. But those are all things that when you get into your car without realizing it, you're anticipating things like that to happen, and that's why it's bad to go in when you're severely inebriated because all your senses are lowered, so you're not going to be as quick to react to things, right? So so what is autism? Whether or not you're considered very severe or very high functioning, you will have a deficit in this area of your brain known as praxis. Your motor planning is somehow skewed. Now, it could manifest in the form, one of the most common forms that it manifests in is communication. So when you have a child who's nonverbal, 90% of the time you're dealing with something called apraxia. So that is a form of a dysfunction of praxis. And it means that the tongue is not, the brain might understand what it wants to say, but the tongue does not know how to make the words come out. And it also might be that you can understand language receptively. So in other words, if somebody says, Virstyne, I take this Kleenex to the trash can, you might understand that, but you wouldn't necessarily be able to say, yeah, okay, because the words don't formulate. You know what I mean? They just don't come. They don't go from your brain to your mouth or from it to your body, you just don't know how to put the sentence together. You know, it's one form or another. Another form of deficit in praxis would be dyslexia, right? And this is where it has to do with reading and writing. Same thing. The words are out of order. You don't perceive it the way that it is presented to you. You don't perceive it in the same way. So autism is a severe form of this because it generally has, it's not just apraxia, dyslexia, it's generally all of these on some level, in some scale. Now, if a person has Asperger's syndrome, they might be able to talk because maybe that part is functional. Maybe they can formulate their words, but they can't pick up on nonverbal language. So they don't pick up on social cues because verbal communication is only about 20 to 30% of communication. Yeah. Communication is mostly nonverbal. And so what that means is, you know, the way that you look, the way that your body moves, the way that you sound, not just what you're saying, but how you sound, like how a dog can understand your tone. And dogs and children, too, even, like babies, they can often understand if you're happy or sad, but they don't necessarily understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. They just know the tone. So that's primitive form of receptive language is understanding tone. And porosity, that's what's called porosity. So anyway, so in a person with Asperger's syndrome, for example, who might be considered very, very high functioning on the autism spectrum, is going to be able to talk. They can articulate their words, but they can't pick up on social cues. They don't know when you're looking bored. They don't see your face. They can't. They just don't see it. It's not that they are not trying to be social with you or that they don't want to have friends. That is something completely different. That has nothing to do with autism. It's that they can't hear you and look at you at the same time. Their bodies, the motor planning is just not there. So it's completely askew. It's so they're talking and going on and on and on, and they don't see what's happening with you. You know, they lose that they're even talking to another person because it's too many things to do at once. It's too dynamic. Yeah. Because you have to be able to, in a way, it's like you have to multitask. You have to be able to look at a person and you pick up on their social cues and go, I'm talking too much. I'm going to stop. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Or you go, or it's their turn to talk. You kind of pause because you know it's their turn. Or you ask a question and you know to wait. Right? But have you ever talked to somebody who asks the question and then continues to talk? Yes. Right? Yeah. And you go, well, wow, this person's like they're socially retarded, like they don't get it. And maybe that's the case, but in the case of somebody on the autistic spectrum, they don't have the motor planning. They can't figure that out. Like it's sort of, they need it to be sort of scripted for them in a way because it takes too much dynamics to try and figure out all of the levels of communication because it's so multifaceted. And anyway, so it's I hope that makes sense to people. I know it might sound,
and the scale is grand, right? Because they're different. Yeah. They're different. Varying degrees of this, what you said, deficit of praxis?
Right. The deficits of praxis are very, yes, they're very, it's a spectrum disorder, so it can be very just, it might appear to be mild, but in people with Asperger's syndrome, it might appear to you to be mild, but it's not necessarily. It's just that, like, for example, someone with Asperger's, who, like I said, wouldn't pick up on nonverbal social cues, but then somebody who's very severe might pick up only on nonverbal cues, and they don't know how to talk, but they've learned. It's usually something that they've learned to compensate. They've learned over time because they are dealing with their apraxia, which is the deficit in their mouth. It's literally like in your tongue. Your tongue doesn't know how to work. You have to like awaken your mouth. Like my son has apraxia. We literally get into his mouth sometimes with like a tongue depressor and things like that, just to sort of try and make his tongue move. We try to help it. We try to assist it along so that it's And anyway, so there's sometimes you have to exercise it. You have to try and like waken the muscle, because it just, the brain does not know how to tell the tongue what to do. So the words just won't come out. But he might have a better understanding of nonverbal communication than somebody with Asperger's. Maybe their tongue does work, and so because of that, they've never learned that other side of communication. So he, can be a little more empathetic. He can show sympathy towards people. He can show those kinds of things. And it's not because he is a sweet boy, but it's not that the person with Asperger's isn't. It just means that they've learned to be very verbal, and so that part is good. So anyone who has a deficit in an area, you're going to try and overcompensate with the area that you're not deficient in, right? You're going to use, like if you're blind, you're going to use your hearing might become heightened, right?
Yeah.
Or vice versa. So you're going to try and overcompensate with what works. So his tongue works, but maybe his eyes don't work. And that's the other thing too. It might not really even be. It might not just be that he doesn't want to look at you. He literally cannot. He cannot look at you in the eye and hear what you have to say at the same time. He can't do it, and because it's too dynamic. So that's what autism is. So when we get these stories about these kids who, like, I always go back to the Adam Lanza story, who was supposed to have a high-functioning form of autism. I was like, my first reaction to that was, well, impossible.
Yeah.
Absolutely impossible. Because if he's anywhere on the autistic spectrum, there's no way he motor planned this scheme. I don't care. It doesn't have anything to do with, him not being violent or him, they go, oh, well, autistic people can be violent. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It doesn't have to do with what a good person he was. Even if he was on psychotropic drugs, which apparently he was on a drug called Fanapt, and he had a negative reaction to it, he still wouldn't have been able to, like, figure out how to do all that, because if you're on the autistic spectrum, that's so much motor planning. It's like you would have to have put on all your gear. You would have had to have taken all these weapons, put them in a car. Let's assume the kid knew how to drive a car, which he probably didn't. Because as I mentioned before, that's a really good example of something that's extremely dynamic. There's a lot going on. We take it for granted because we're so used to it, and we've done it so many times that after a while you just don't realize what all that's going on in your brain while you're driving a car. Everything that you're thinking about and anticipating is a lot. A person with autism, one thing at a time.
Yeah. Because
they do not have the motor planning to think of all those things at once. Their praxis is messed up. Well, how does praxis get messed up? Well, because you've had an injury to you've had an assault within your central nervous system. So something gets in there. It's a heavy metal, a virus, a combination of these bacteria, et cetera, can get in there, and because it is something that's capable of passing the myelin sheath, which is your blood-brain barrier. You're penetratable. It's not impenetrable, but there are very few things that can pass it. And once that happens, it gets into your central nervous system, and that means that something is misfiring to the brain. So now the signals, the cues that you're getting from your environment are not giving you the right. They're not telling you the right story, or maybe they're telling you the right story, but you can't respond to it in the correct way. So that's what autism is. That's really what it is. Now, how the DSM diagnoses it is they have I believe it's like around 4 categories, and of those 4 categories, you have to have like 1 to 2 in each. You have to have at least 1 from each category, and then a totaling of like 6 or 7 of these behaviors that they call. And the behaviors are communication, self-stimulatory, a few other things. So the DSM, how it diagnoses autism, it looks at stereotypical behaviors. It doesn't look at, and if you don't have all of the listed criterias under these stereotypical behaviors, then they can say that, well, you're not autistic. So it can, it can be something that isn't necessarily diagnosed correctly, and in other words, because it may not have anything to do with praxis. But usually, there's something in there that has to do with praxis. And like as for Jenny McCarthy's son, clearly he still has, issues. Is unable to pick up on social cues because he doesn't have the motor planning to communicate in that way, to understand communication receptively in that way. So he's being bullied by other kids and doesn't recognize what's happening. So I don't know. I mean, it's probably really heartbreaking for her, but because he doesn't get it, he probably doesn't really know. So, but it's heartbreaking to see it because she feels like that's my son, and
yeah,
he's being messed with, he just probably wants to have friends, and he doesn't recognize that they're not his friends. Just sad, but that's what autism is, and it's that's what the autism spectrum is, really and truly. It's this deficit in the area of praxis, which can occur, as I said, from it's a brain injury, and it can happen. You can in any way that a brain injury can occur, but in most cases it's chemically induced, either by toxins or by bacteria, by viruses that are injected into the body and get into the brain, and get into the through the blood-brain barrier into the central nervous system, and it affects your nerve and your brain's ability to talk to its body. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
How the brain talks to the body. So, and then most of that is we so take that for granted. But like if I'm to give you a simple example, it's just how I have to teach my son how to do things. Like it took me almost 2 years to teach him how to put on his seatbelt in the car, because when you break it down into steps, it's like 10 steps. You get in, you got to pull it, you got to reach back and pull it over, you got to snap it in, you got to adjust it, you got to do all these things, right? And and if you're in a different seat in the car, you might have it from a different angle, or you might, if you're in the middle seat, you might have just the lap band. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's all different every time, so that requires your brain to be very dynamic and to figure out, okay, it's not on this side, it's on this side. So it took a long time for him to understand that he had to open the door, that he had to sit down. I had to break all those things down into steps, and we had to do it repeatedly because he just didn't have the motor planning to just go, okay, I know how to get in, and to just watch somebody else. For most people, you don't even necessarily need anyone to teach you.
Yeah.
You just, one day someone tells you to do it, and you just do it because you've seen other people do it, so you've picked up on how to do it. But if you have a deficit in the area of praxis, well, you're not going to be able to do it. You're going to go do what? Your brain's not going to figure it out. You're not even going to have a fucking clue. Or you might understand what they're asking you, but you wouldn't know how to begin to do it. So it took a long time, so I had to teach him. I mean, he can do it now, but, I mean, it was one thing to teach him how to do it. It was another thing to teach him how to do it no matter what seat he was in the car. And then it was another thing to teach him how to do it and also remember to shut the door. It was like all of those things had to be taught. And now, even still, he'll stand at the doorway and I'll go, Aiden, open the door. I have to tell him because his motor planning is like, I know I'm supposed to do something here, but I can't remember or I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do. And so I have to tell him, and then he opens it. And then he can then he clicks back in and he goes, okay, now I know what to do. Boom, boom, boom. And he shuts the door and he puts on his seatbelt and this and that. So it's a lot going on, and we just take that for granted because it comes to us. It comes to most people naturally because once you have that deficit in praxis, you have to seek other channels in your brain.
So then you're also talking about like the lower end of the spectrum. So what is like what about people like Rain Man or people like what's his name, Stephen Wiltshire, that can like look at a city and draw it, like draw the whole city? Did you see the guy? And I'm just playing devil's advocate. Or I'm just trying to get a better, or have our listeners get a better understanding.
Well, I mean, what he is doing is a savant is very rare, first of all, because a lot of people, because they have, when you've had a movie made about you, you're probably somebody who's very interesting. And savants are very interesting because people don't, they can't figure out, well, why is this person can't pick up on typical social cues, but yeah, he can draw a picture of an entire city. Or, why can Rain Man, calculate all these numbers. And the truth of the matter is that when you have a deficit, just like I mentioned, the blind and the deaf thing, you tend to overcompensate with something else. So something that does come naturally to you, you can have a photogenic memory. I met this kid at the haircutting salon one time, and he was autistic. And he was clearly on the autistic spectrum, but he was not he talked, but he wasn't high-functioning really because he was very autistic. It was very obvious. But he could tell you any day of the week in the calendar. So he said, what's your birthday? I said, November 29th. He goes, oh, that is going to be on a Saturday this year. Last year it was on a blah, blah, blah. And he just memorizes these things. Why do certain people have savant characteristics? Just because they've learned to heighten the things that they're good at. Some people are going to be, everyone's good at something. So he wasn't necessarily high functioning because he's not going to be able to probably live on his own. This kid was like 17, 18 years old. He's a real nice kid. He's talkative. He could see, but he clearly just was very, very autistic. He needed help. He couldn't be by himself. He was there at the salon because his sister had to watch him because his parents were in the hospital. So you're talking a 17, 18-year-old kid that can't be alone in the house. So that doesn't mean he's high functioning just because he has savant characteristics. That's just something that, some people have, autistic or not. They just might have some kind of abilities to they're just good at something. Everybody's good at something. And at some point, whether or not you're very low functioning on the autistic spectrum or not, you can figure out what you're good at and try to enhance that. And that's generally, what a savant is. But a savant does not characterize an autistic person. That's a very big misconception. That guy who wrote the book, Dennis Leary, the comedian, and he was the one who made that comment about how people didn't really have autism, that it was fake. Mm-hmm. And what he was describing was savants. He was saying an autistic person can do this, and he was describing the kinds of things that we were just saying. But that's a very rare thing. And it's not in a whole lot of autistic people. It's not in a lot of people across the world,
yeah.
that have heightened abilities like that. But, this guy, that he can draw a picture of an entire city, so he has very good visual memory. He has very good visual perception. That's one area of sensory input. But that doesn't mean he knows how to drive a car. That doesn't mean he can, he knows how to, get in, does he know how to take the subway to, go get something to eat? All these types of things. So just because someone has a savant characteristic doesn't make them high functioning.
I didn't know that. Okay. I actually was confused about that, so I'm glad. I mean, I know you know a lot about this, as you should, so I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's savant. You're talking about 0.001% of the autistic people have a savant.
Well, that's when I've heard people, when they think about autism, that's what they think about. So also, it's interesting, too, when you were talking, when Sandy Hook happened, we talked about how, it's impossible for him to do, and they do what he did because of the motor planning you would need to be able to pull something off like that.
Yeah.
So it's scary that these people don't know. People don't know. They don't know, and they're easily manipulated if they don't know. So.
Right. Well, I mean, you're assuming a lot about this kid. If it's true that he's on the autistic spectrum, and everything that I had heard, he was diagnosed as a child. And he had babysitters come in and watch him, well past the age of when a kid would normally need a babysitter. So that's one indicator to me that he was on the autistic spectrum, because developmentally he was younger. So I think he was 12 or so, and he had this guy come in who was 16 to watch him. And his mother had instructed the babysitter, don't leave him alone, because he needs to be watched very carefully. And everybody said, see, that's a sign that he was violent. But the babysitter said he wasn't violent. He never did anything violent. His mother was very protective, though. And, well, yeah, she's protective because he can't function on his own without, making a mess or hurting himself or getting lost. Some kids are, autistic kids have a tendency to wander, right? Well, you can imagine with their motor planning skills, you don't want them walking down the street by themselves because they won't know how to get back home. And but it's a very common thing because they have also things going on in their body that might make them, antsy, like very hyperactive and, different kinds of unsettlingness. They might feel calmed by walking, whatever. So they will go outside the house. This is very, very common. They have the desire to wander, and they'll go walking outside the house and then get lost. And it's how a lot of kids on the autistic spectrum end up drowning. There's been several incidents where these kids die and they drown because they wander and they don't know how to swim, and they get into, find a pool of water where they drown and they die because they don't know how to swim because they're autistic and they have motor planning deficits, and they probably don't have the motor planning skills to swim, for one, and then they don't, they wander off and don't know how to get back home. So that's again, like that can be somebody who's considered high functioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very, very, and they'll go, yeah, well, he's high functioning, but is he? Can he live on his own? Can he hold the job? Can he do all the, and so Adam Lanza, they claimed, he was high functioning, but he couldn't be left alone. And it wasn't because he was violent, because there was no reporting of any kind of violence whatsoever. So it was because his mom was probably afraid that he would wander or he would do something to hurt himself. And so it just is that misunderstanding that allowed people to think, because people won't necessarily know the difference between, say, autism and schizophrenia. They might go, well, they're both mental disorders, so then they'd be on drugs, and then therefore those drugs will make them crazy, and then they'll act out and they'll do things. Well, yeah, the drugs make people crazy. There's no doubt about it. And they make people violent. There's no doubt about that. But you would still have to have the mind to carry it out. You'd still have to be able to, figure out how to put all that gear on your body and then load up, all these guns in a car. And, you'd have to know he'd have to have knowledge of what each type of the guns were. Mm. Just because he had gone to a shooting range a few times doesn't mean he was an expert. People are stupid. It's sorry, I don't mean to,
yeah,
but
yeah.
they don't think.
Yeah.
How can you explain how this kid knew how to do all that?
Yeah.
You can't explain it. And then when you add in the fact that he was autistic, it's just impossible.
Yeah.
It's just outright impossible. And so that's what triggered me right away when I heard that. And then they said that he was on a drug called Fanapt, and I said, even still, even if he lost it and he killed his mom or killed himself, he got suicidal or something, I could believe that, but I just carrying out something such a massive
intricate plan,
intricate plan, and going to another city, and then there was no motive because he. They had all these different things flying around, his mom worked there, so he was jealous of the students she never did. That ended up being false. She actually never worked there. There's no record of her at all. And they said, well, he went to school there. And then again, the school nurse, nobody had ever heard of him. So there was no record of him that way. Then, it was just it was just bizarre. And then nobody knew who he was. But they had this security system where someone had to let you in by buzzer, so they could see you from a security camera, and then they would either let you in or not. And then they said, oh well, he got because somebody left a window open. He went through a window. I'm telling you, his motor planning would not have figured that out. I guarantee it. No fucking way. And then why are they leaving windows open if they're so worried about security that they have to have this? It's ridiculous. It's just nonsense. I don't even like to get into it because it just goes to show how, people don't want to accept. They want to accept the official story without understanding how it could have possibly happened.
Yeah.
You know, they go, well, why? Why are the children dead? You know, and they get all sad. It's like, well, yeah, that's really, really sad. But how did it happen?
Yeah.
How? And let's first talk about the shooter. How did he do it? You know, did he know how to shoot all those guns? Did he, you know? And the answer is no. He didn't. Yeah. He didn't know how to shoot all those guns. He didn't know how to. It's insane. So, gosh. So anyway, so that's hopefully people have a better understanding. Maybe we should do more shows on this.
Yeah, I think we should.
I know it's complicated, and I know it's hard for people to understand. You know, but it's really common. It's such a huge thing going on right now. They say even around 1 in 68 children are autistic. So it's not. You know, it's something that everyone's going to have to deal with at some point or another. Yeah. And so it would be best to understand it. And I make it a point to understand it beyond, I think, what even a lot of people who work in the industry because it's just part of my nature, to really get into things very deeply sometimes. And I have also, you know, my heart's in it, because I want to understand what's going on with my son. So, you know, it's been something that I've taken on, for that reason. But Deborah Merlin, who we're going to be talking about next, she's actually really knowledgeable about autism as well, because her two boys, though they were diagnosed with ADHD, I do think that at one point one of her sons was diagnosed with on the autistic spectrum, and like high functioning, and you know, throughout her dealings, the things that she was dealing with, she did sort of question if there was maybe some autistic behaviors as well, and I think that there were, and so she considers her work, I think she kind of considers this to be sort of one and the same kind of thing. It's just ADHD as like a higher functioning form of autism. And I would agree, because if it's real, if there's a real behavioral problem that you're witnessing, it's not just a kid that wants to go outside and play, but if it's a real problem, they do tend to overlap. Because my son also has, you know, what you would describe as ADHD, because although he has diagnosis of autism, he's very high. He can be very hyperactive, and you know, and not in a like just because he wants to go outside, but in like bouncing off the walls, running back and forth for no reason, and you're like, oh, okay, you know, and he can't calm himself down. It's not that he doesn't want to; it's that he can't, and so there is some overlap, and Deborah follows her book is Victory Over ADHD. We're going to take a short break, and when we get back, we're going to be talking to Deborah about her work and her book. So please stay with us.
Everything I'm looking at seems crazy. The newspaper, the television, nothing's right. Nothing's telling me what's true. It's like I fell into a bucket of cream and kicked my legs until I became a mouse. What's that about? I'm a conspiracy realist, not a conspiracy theorist. I want a t-shirt that represents me. What? There's one that's available? Go to shop.truthertease.com, says the voice in my head. Shop.truthertease.com. It's not crazy. I'm not afraid to go on the internet and go to shop.truthertease.com. I'm not scared. I've taken out bowling balls that look like you. That's what I said. Straighten out. Get your conspiracy realist t-shirt. Don't make me come over there. You look good. You look
Hi,
good.
welcome back to Truth or Talk. On today's show, we're talking to Deborah Merlin. Deborah, for 15 years, made her mission to be an advocate for her twins with special needs. As a new mother of very premature twins with challenging health problems, she found that doctors and other professionals offered only drugs as the solution. To find alternative ways to heal her children, she attended alternative medicine and nutritional seminars, performed extensive research on ADHD and other health-related issues, and kept impeccable records. She is a frequent guest on radio shows throughout the United States and Canada. Deborah is also a consultant to parents who need support and provides resources regarding their children's individual needs. She's an artist and an author of her book, Victory Over ADHD, is available at Amazon and at her website, victoryoveradhd.com. Please welcome to the show, Deborah Merlin. Hey, Deborah.
Hi, April, for having me on.
Hey, hey, Deborah. I'm Virstyne. Nice to meet you.
To meet you, too.
So,
go ahead.
So in the intro, we mentioned that you had premature twins, and as a result, they had some health issues. So could you actually, tell our audience about your experience with this?
Well, 25 years ago, would you believe, I gave birth to premature twins. They were born 10 weeks premature. And one of the twins actually fared pretty well, considering how premature they were. But they both had to be in incubators. The second twin, twin B, had Highland membrane disease, which is immature lungs, and he needed assistance to breathe with a ventilator for the first month of his life, and then he was on oxygen for a couple of months. He was in the NICU for 4 months and had to be rehospitalized 4 times after he was released from the hospital because he didn't have the energy to suck, swallow, and breathe enough fluid to thrive. So he was listed failure to thrive when he was born and after that. So it was a hard journey. And then we had to have a nurse come to our house every night to gavage feed him, and that's when they put a tube through the nose that goes down to the tummy to give him, well, actually at that point I was still pumping breast milk, so they were getting my breast milk, which was fortunate. And then after a year, he started to really come around and started thriving, but it was a very intense first year of his life. Actually, it was 15 months of his life that we had to have the nurse come every night to gavage feed him. But along that, with his journey, I was a new parent, never had children, and I was totally unaware of the adverse reactions to vaccinations. And fortunately, the hepatitis B vaccine was not available yet when my kids were born. But they did get the Hep B vaccine when they were 4 years old. And they both were showing signs of autism early on, but I was not aware of it. And then they entered an early intervention preschool when they were 2 years, 4 months old, and the teacher thought for sure they were both autistic. But by the time she was done working with them at 3 years old, she thought they were more ADHD. And as you guys probably know that ADD, ADHD is on the spectrum of autism. So, and quite often the diagnosis can fluctuate depending on what the child ate that day or what's going on with health. So for the first twin, who actually was the healthier twin, had a severe dairy allergy. And unfortunately, when he started getting ear infections, the pediatrician kept on prescribing antibiotics to treat it. And by the time he was 6 years old, he'd been on 35 rounds of antibiotics. And the pediatrician was recommending just to put him on a low course of antibiotics indefinitely. Then I was having a lot of my own health issues, and I was starting to seek alternative help for myself, and then I decided that maybe this is the route I should take my children. And it turns out that a Chinese doctor said both my kids had dairy allergies. So we took them off the dairy, gave them some Chinese herbs, and all of a sudden the ear infection stopped. There was no more fluid in my son's ears. And what was interesting, prior to being diagnosed with a dairy allergy, a lot of the teachers and healthcare professionals thought for sure that he was autistic. He wasn't autistic. What was happening is he wasn't hearing because his ears were always full of fluid.
Oh, wow. Mm.
So once we cleared his the dairy allergy, he had no more signs of autism, no more symptoms at all. The second twin continued to have a lot of challenges because of his health history, and he was also on a lot of antibiotics. As a matter of fact, when they were in the NICU, they were both on antibiotics at 3 pounds. The sick twin, not only did he have trouble breathing, but when he was 3 weeks old, he developed meningitis and staph infection at the same time.
Oh, my God. Wow.
So, and of course, you would think maybe the doctors, putting them on antibiotics at such a young age, maybe should have followed up with some probiotics. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, these doctors are not educated in regards to that, or they weren't then anyway. Maybe they are now. But so it was a long journey. They both showed signs of attention deficit disorder, and the second twin also had facial tics. And when the healthcare professionals started to recommend that we treat them with Ritalin, this is way before the internet and Google search. So I had to actually go to the library to do research and talk to pharmacists. And one of the side effects of Ritalin is facial tics. And one of my twins already had facial tics, yet the doctors were still recommending Merlin for him. And my husband said, no way. And I was ready to put them both on Merlin because I was the one who was with them all the time dealing with their hyperactivity. So it was really stressful for me. But my husband said I could not. So that forced me to actually go into alternative research. And at that point, that's when I learned about Merlin and the side effects. So it was like a 8-year journey to stop the dairy, to finding out what was causing my other son's facial tics. And it was actually, I think, probably the vaccinations that were causing, that triggered the facial tics, and their food allergies, and their attention deficit disorder. And it turned out also, one of my sons who had the facial tics, as he was getting older, he had a violent temper and with no impulse control. So he was always kicking, scratching, biting his twin brother. And it got scary at some point because he was getting big and I couldn't control it. And it was getting worse. His temper was getting worse. His facial tics were getting worse. And so it was recommended by my medical alternative doctor to do a QEEG on him, which is a quantitative computer analysis of brain electrical activity or brain waves. It turned out he was having brain seizures. Another side effect of vaccinations.
Yeah, definitely.
But through all this, I never even thought about the vaccinations being a possible contributing cause to their symptoms. This didn't come to much later. But while once we got the results that he was having brain seizure activity, which incidentally is very common in the autism population and ADHD population, I think it's critical that all these children who are showing signs of autism or ADHD have a QEEG done to rule out seizures, because I've heard up to 75% or up to 35% of children, autistic children and ADD children, are actually having brain seizure activity. And to prescribe the right medication, which, as you know from my book, I'm anti-meds, but if you were to go that route, it would be really, really serious if you put a child on a stimulant that was having brain seizures.
I'm sorry. I don't want to go on.
Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead.
No. I just want to ask you, what do you think the difference between some parents who actually research and find out the pros and the cons of stimulant drugs, and the parents who just accept the diagnosis and the treatment and put their child on drugs without thinking about it? Because you were very fortunate to kind of seem like you did the research and you figured out, the side effects and how dangerous they could be, but there are parents that are just fed up and they're frustrated and they don't know what to do with their child, and they'll just put them on there, on the drug.
Yeah, well, I actually had my husband to thank for that, because it didn't feel right to him and our kids were already on allergy medications. They were getting allergy shots for, numerous environmental allergies. So my husband, and they were on their tech for their allergies, and they've been on so many antibiotics. My husband said, I believe, and also the twin B had asthma, and then the other twin was diagnosed with asthma. Another side effect of vaccinations.
Yeah.
And I was blaming everything on their prematurity, and sure, that definitely was part of the cause. But I think the vaccines were the actual, the final straw of the camel's back. But as far as what made me do the research, it was basically because my husband was opposed to it. I was, as I said earlier on, I was one who was with him all the time. I was hearing the complaints from the teachers all the time, and the doctors were recommending it. So if it weren't for my husband, I could have actually put them on Merlin or something like that. But because my husband was so emphatic that, no, you will not put them on Ritalin, it forced me to actually go to the pharmacist and say, I want to see the brochure, I want to see the side effects. And that's when I saw the facial tics. I said, no way. And also, stimulants will have an effect on their appetite. And my kids had very small appetites. They were both really skinny and small. They were like 25 percentile for their height and weight. So there was no way I could put them on stimulants for appetite and for the facial tics. And also, stimulants really are dangerous. They go against what's natural for a growing child, because in order for a child to release the human growth hormone and to grow to be healthy adults, they need to sleep a lot. And stimulants cause insomnia in children, and it stunts their growth because they're not sleeping enough hours or getting enough restful sleep, and the human growth hormone can only be released when they're sleeping. So if they're not getting enough sleep, their growth will be stunted. And as the body grows, so does the brain. So the brain gets stunted as well. I mean, what parent would want to, if they knew this, what parent would want to put their kids on a stimulant that could stunt their brain growth? That just is mind-boggling to me.
Especially when they have a neurological issue to begin with. I mean, it's counterproductive to what you're trying to treat.
Absolutely. So I was fortunate to find some really good doctors along the way. But as I said, it was a journey. I felt like it was a journey that I was meant to take. And it was one step at a time till we finally found that, because all the steps helped somewhat. But at the very end, when we found out about the brain seizures, that was a true beginning of the healing for actually both my kids, because the brain seizures were actually caused by an amino acid deficiency. And when we got the results that my son was having brain seizures, the doctor said Depakote is usually what's the recommended drug for brain seizures, and it also has a million side effects, including death. And,
oh my God. Yeah,
and Depakote is a very serious drug, and I believe it does have the black box warning on it.
Oh,
so,
God.
yeah. So again, that was the answer. But fortunately, my doctor was educated on alternative medicine, and he said, let's do an amino acid panel on him and find out what's happening with his amino acids, because if he does have deficiency, that could be contributing to a lot of his symptoms. And, of course, the amino acid panel came back, and he was very critically low. And once we started the amino acid supplements, all his symptoms vanished. No more facial tics, no more violent temper. So that was my journey with him. And we didn't get the answers until 8th grade. So a lot of parents I've spoken to, they're so concerned because their kid may be already 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And it's not, of course, the sooner you get the help, the better, but it's not too late, even for older children, to get this help and to really come around and improve without any pharmaceuticals.
In your book, I remember that being like a huge part of your children's comeback was in their restoration of their health was the amino acids. And but you did you were kind of talked into doing some medications, and I think eventually ended up just kind of getting them off of everything.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was when my kids graduated elementary school and they're going into middle school, which was a much larger school. The twin, this is before we found the answers for the amino acids. The twin that was having the facial tics, he was having a lot of anxiety. So a psychiatrist that I saw recommended that we put him on a very low dosage of Risperdal, which one of the side effects is that boys grow breasts.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did for a few months. We did try it for a few months. Every night before we went to bed, we gave him like the lowest dosage, and it made him so tired he could hardly wake up in the morning. And that was at the lowest dosage. We did try that for 2 months through the transition, and we stopped because we didn't like the side effects. And then we were back. And also, it didn't really help. It may have helped him with anxiety a little bit, but he was still showing violent tendencies and had the facial tics. All those issues were not going away.
Speaking of that, they just, what was the name of the drug again? You said that makes the boys grow the breast?
Risperdal?
Yes, Risperdal. They just had a recall on that, talking about that. There's a class action suit going on now about Risperdal and the fact that it makes boys grow breasts.
Right, right. I mean, large breasts, that they had to have mastectomies.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
That information's been out for a while, but I was aware that there's a lawsuit against the company. Isn't it Johnson & Johnson that makes the drug?
I think so. I mean, I saw it actually a couple days ago, and it really infuriated me because I'm thinking, you can't. How do you? I mean, they might get money, but how do you fix that? Really, you have a son that has breasts. That's just
right.
That's just twisted. There's nothing.
It is.
There's no amount of money. Maybe they can get a mastectomy, but still, there's no. I mean, that's terrible.
Well, the emotional.
Huh?
The emotional aspect, as Deborah mentioned, and then also
right, emotional,
yeah.
The boys would be laughed out, and I mean, imagine what it does to their self-esteem. It'd be awful.
Yeah.
So once you wake up, you become aware. The more you become aware, and you become more and more aware of all the things that you've been doing wrong. And how we're being misled in our society about how to heal children and actually what's causing the issues. And what I learned through my journey too is I had attention deficit disorder growing up in New Jersey. But actually what it was, when I was growing up in New Jersey, they were still spraying the pesticide DDT every summer to kill.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that causes neurological damage and thyroid disorders, which I have. So I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in my late teens. And there is a link between autoimmune diseases and autistic children. Yeah, and also, but you still have to go back to what's causing that autoimmune disease. I believe it was the DDT pesticide, and I also had a sweet tooth when I was growing up, and I ended up having 15 amalgam fillings, which is 50% mercury, by the time I was 20.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, and every time you drink hot fluids or chew foods, mercury vapors from your amalgam fillings are released, and they go into the body, and they're accumulative. So that also probably attacked my thyroid, which my doctor believes. And so I was pretty toxic before I conceived. And so, there's that factor too. There needs to be more education and more emphasis on both parents on ideally should be do a detox or be checked for heavy metal toxicity before they start a family.
Right. Yeah, because once you're pregnant, too, it's too late, because then you don't want to detox. You can't
detox. Yeah.
It could be harmful to the baby at that point.
Right.
And so you feel that you were already toxic, and then you kind of set the children, on that path, and then they were later vaccine damaged, and being premature, they were also very sensitive. And it's funny, as you've done probably a lot of research on vaccines since then, that you mentioned DDT, that was the original cause for the spike in what they would later label as polio. So that's like part of that whole, I guess, cover-up that, the vaccines actually cured polio. They were trying to, that was the propaganda, when it was actually, that they just relabeled it. It was actually DDT, toxic poisoning.
And and that's a frequent debate I have with the pro-vaxxers.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it wasn't polio, it was DDT. But
right, because they all think that they use the these diseases have all been eradicated. How can you say the vaccines are banned? But the truth is that it because the vaccines actually didn't cure polio, and they didn't cure smallpox and anything else. The CDC is just clever at relabeling, but we know industry, pesticides and vaccines, and now what Monsanto is doing with the herbicides and whatnot actually causes sickness. So
Suzanne Humphreys gives a really good lecture on that whole the whole polio myth and vaccines.
Oh, yeah.
You can look up Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, and polio, and there's a lecture that she breaks it down in more detail for anybody that wants to understand it or get a good foundation for trying to understanding it more. So.
Yeah, definitely. And so back to you, Deborah. We want to. So you had the kids. You did break down and put them on some of the drugs, but then you didn't keep them on long. And you were. I remember in your book you were constantly looking to wean them off. You were sort of trying to find something that would work, and then I think wasn't it the amino acids that you gave them that later you said, that they don't need this anymore, that eventually you got them off of the drugs. And so what were some of the most, I know that one was, and aside from that one, what were some of the most healing, holistic healing methods that worked for your children?
Okay. Well, initially, of course, it was the dairy. That was the first step. And I hate to admit this, but I have to be honest. I was the poster mother for who did everything wrong with their diet. Mm-hmm. My kids were picky eaters, as I said up front, and they were watching cartoons, and I'd give in to them buying Fruit Loops and cereal that had artificial food coloring. And once I was desperate, and we do go into the denial. On the box would say fortified with vitamins A, B, D, C, whatever. But this is synthetic vitamins, not organic. So I was sending them off to school, feeding them Fruit Loops for breakfast and toast, and so here they're having wheat and artificial food coloring. No wonder why they were bouncing off the walls in class, and I was getting complaints. So that was actually, I don't want to say my fault, because that's not really fair, because I wouldn't blame myself for any other parent. We do the best with the knowledge that we have. Right. And so, once I realized that, when they were in first grade, when I just eliminated all artificial food coloring, I started to go to the farmer's market and buy organic produce, fruit. So they come home and have organic apples and strawberries instead of a cookie. But I actually never did get into too many sweets with them, because I had a really bad sweet tooth growing up, and I know sugar is not healthy. And they already had sugar for breakfast. But actually what they needed for breakfast was protein, and that they weren't getting. So I was actually contributing to their symptoms. So that was one of the major things I did to improve their symptoms. And they did have candida. So that was, I addressed their diet, with the anti-candida diet, and Chinese herbs that were really helpful. And so those were the major stepping stones. But still, with the one twin in 8th grade, or 7th, I guess it was the middle of 7th grade, that when we found that he had he was having activity, it wasn't until that point that we that was big time difference. All the other things we did along were helpful, but that made the biggest difference. That was huge. We did biofeedback. That didn't help.
That didn't help, you say?
We did biofeedback, but I really didn't discuss that in the book only because I know other parents who have had success with it. So maybe it didn't work for my children, but it could work for others. So anyway, does that answer your question?
I was just wanting to know for other people that are listening, what were some of the things. And I think for myself as well, as I have a vaccine-damaged son too, what you're saying about diet really is true. It's like it's the key to so much. And it doesn't, a lot of times there's these sort of magic, or people find like magic bullets or magic pills or whatever you want to call it, but then they don't, if you don't change the diet, then you're not going to get anywhere. It's just like, filling a bucket with a hole in it. And one of the other
holes,
it's not. One of the other treatments you talked about in your book that I read the book by, her name is escaping me, the Handle treatment. Can you describe what the Handle treatment is?
Judith Bluestone.
Yeah.
The Fabric of Autism, the most important book ever written on autism, seriously. The Handle Institute stands for Holistic Approach to Neurodevelopment and Learning Efficiency. Mm-hmm. Judith was born, she died tragically a few years ago, but she was born 68 years ago, and her father was one of the original developers of pesticides like DDT. He actually was one of the scientists who worked and brought it home on his shoes, sprayed his yard with it. And Judith was a toddler and had developed autism. But that wasn't the label that they were using then. She also had, she did get the measles vaccine when she was 3 years old. And 2 days later, she came down with the worst measles outbreak her pediatrician had ever seen in his practice.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's some people who definitely should not, nobody should get vaccinated, in my opinion, but there's some people who really should not. Babies should really be withheld, like premature babies. And,
right, of course.
But with, or a baby who has a compromised immune system. But Judith was autistic. She had a lot of bizarre behaviors, but she happened to be, I want to say idiot savant, but she really truly wasn't a classic idiot savant, but she had that idiot savant genius in neurology of all things. So she understood the brain intuitively as a young girl and was able to develop these low-tech exercises herself to rewire her brain and to heal herself. And she did. And she was so intuitive, she could look at a child who's on the spectrum and tell immediately why that child is the way they are and knew what exercises to give that child to rebuild their neural pathways in their brain to overcome autism or any other neurological challenge that they have. And she went on to be the founder of Handle Institute. She was the recipient of the Jacqueline Onassis Award. She has clinics all over the world, and people have, you can learn to become a Handle practitioner through their program. which is being offered every year. They need practitioners. They need people to learn these methods to teach other people. Because her methods really work. As a matter of fact, there's one method that she has is it's sucking water through a crazy straw. If your child has vision problems or is a bedwetter, the sucking water through a crazy straw, what happens is you have to use your sphincter muscles to suck the water through the straw, and by doing that, you're exercising your bladder and making it stronger.
That's so interesting.
Okay. So Judith developed all these techniques herself, hundreds of them, for all kinds of neurological issues, and they work. They're very effective. Unfortunately, they don't have the funding and the promotion to really get the word out there. But the Fabric of Autism, I really recommend that book with my book, Victory Over ADHD. And matter of fact, Judith actually wrote a chapter for my book before she died. A few months before she died, she completed a chapter for my book. So I don't know if you remember reading that, April. Did you read it?
I do remember reading that, and Judith, I read her book actually, and I remember the exercise with the crazy straw. That's one that we use with aid in the oral motor, and then but it also helps your vision. And some of them are really, really simple. So how did your children respond to them?
Well,
when you started doing?
Okay, well, the only method we did was the crazy straw for the one that was wetting his bed for 17 years. He stopped after 5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And we tried everything and nothing worked. But he was premature. He had low muscle tone. He had a weak bladder. So that was very effective. So that's why I'm a huge fan. It's like I didn't have to wash his sheets every day anymore.
I want to backtrack a little bit because when you were talking about diet, I wanted to ask this question. I heard you say in an interview with Leslie Carabotha that what you're addicted to, you're most likely allergic to. Why is that?
Yeah.
Why is that?
You know, I don't know the true reason, but it just seems that's what it is. Maybe because we eat it too much. And I guess if you eat something too much, you can develop an allergy to it. Because you're addicted to it and keep on eating it, and your body starts to.
But your body,
develop.
Your body's way of telling you you're having too much because it's trying to seek out calories.
Right.
Okay.
And then you want to eat it more, but sugar is highly addictive, and I know of one boy one mom that I worked with, he was addicted to soy milk, and I mean really allergic to soy milk and addicted to soy milk, and she could not get him off of it. To save her life, she ended up putting them on drugs, unfortunately, because he would not cooperate. But that is, so the corn, wheat, sugar, with soy, dairy are the main allergens.
Or gluten's wheat, right? Wheat and gluten.
Gluten, wheat, gluten. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I just, that's all the good food, basically.
Yes.
all the good tasting food, basically. You know, as a teacher, I often think about this too because I wasn't really as hyperactive in school as I was outside of school, but I would daydream a lot. And and I look at some of my children that daydream, or some of them that are hyperactive, and you know, I don't think that. I think that children are made. I don't think that children are made to listen to someone lecture for hours a day, and I'm just curious too. How much of a role do you think the current educational classroom structure plays in the diagnosis of children with ADD and ADHD?
That's a problem because ADHD kids do really well when they're more hands-on and they're doing physical things. Yeah. And so you have to sit there. You know, with their hands, or writing, or with their hands in lap, listening, you know, for hours a day. Kids are meant to move. You know, they have high energy. They need to burn it off. And it's also unfortunate that they're taking they're cutting back or taking out a lot of the PE programs, physical education programs, in schools as well, because that is also needed to balance the brain and to bring oxygen into the brain so you can learn better, more efficiently. So I agree. But also because I had attention deficit growing up as well, and I remember sitting in school thinking, I'm going to really pay attention today. And as soon as the teacher started talking, I'd be out the window, gone. It's amazing I ever got through. But if we were actually like participating like in an art project, I'd be 100% present.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I just see. I feel like, you know, I have especially I have a couple kids right now in one of my classes, and he's a brilliant, creative, wonderful kid, really nice, helpful. There's a lot of wonderful things I can say about this kid. But when I start teaching or lecturing or writing on the board, he's just like on the floor, on the like, you know, he always has to get up. He's always thinking of an excuse to get up. I need to throw this away. I need to do something else. You know, on the other side of the room. It drives me crazy. And as a teacher, as a creative person and as a person that hates sitting down for a long period of time myself, I totally relate to him. But as a teacher, it's very frustrating when you have to get through a certain amount of material, you know, in a certain amount of time, and then you have to teach all these kids the same things, and then
right.
I've seen that.
Are you asking the mother? Are you asking the parents what they're feeding him for breakfast?
No, I think, but I see like because I teach an afternoon class, so I think he's you know, I do see he does eat a lot of sugar and stuff, and soda, and all that stuff. But I also think it's the structure, and I think, you know, these kids that are like that, people are a lot of times too quick to, you know, diagnose them and try and medicate them, and really they're just a smart kid that needs a different type of learning environment, I feel.
Right. Yes, I agree. And also school's not, yeah, it's like not everyone is meant to fit into that structure, and there needs to be different types of classrooms for different types of children. You know, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, but of course it's challenging in this time and age with so many budget cutbacks in education, and I also think it's tragic that they've taken art and music out of many of the schools too, because this is where these children tend to excel. So you're really limiting their opportunities to make their mark and to figure out what they're going to do with their life. But yeah.
And how can some of those things too, like you mentioned, art and music, be sort of healing, or what do you know about that as far as like music, for example, building new neural pathways in the brain, and you know, some kids really need that.
They do. Well, actually playing an instrument balances the brain, the right and left hemisphere of the brain.
Yeah.
So you learn both ways. So that's another reason why it's tragic that they've taken so many of the creative classes out of the schools. And I also feel that art, when you're working on an art project in the classroom, that's when children can talk, and it's therapeutic. Yeah. And then children start sharing things with each other, and it builds on your social skills and friendship and confidence.
Yeah.
So there's so many reasons why we need to get the arts and music back into the schools. It really is very important for our critical thinking as well, to be able to create something that's not exactly what we're taught, but we're actually using our imagination, which as an artist, I know that's really important too. I'm happiest when I'm doing art, and I'm sure that's true with every creative person, that when they're in their element, that's when they're going to really shine and be able to express themselves. And so anyway.
No, you're right. I get it. You want to ask something, April? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just curious too, because I read your book, and then I've listened to you on interviews talk about different ingredients and things such as like Jell-O and Fruit Loops and then dairy and antibacterial soap. And then, when you really start to comprehend how toxins affect us, you realize that we're surrounded by toxins, and it's really hard to escape them, if not impossible. So did you ever get paranoid, or do you become, or how do you not get paranoid or avoid becoming obsessive about freeing yourself from toxins? Because I've actually, I've kind of gone that way a little bit. There's some days I'm like, oh my God, it's the water, the food, the air, everywhere. In the
fluoride. Yeah, don't forget the fluoride.
The fluoride, everything, So what do you do to kind of balance yourself and keep from...
Well, what I do, and I am pretty good at that because I don't want to drive myself crazy, but I know there's some times that we are going to eat GMO food, are going to be exposed to other pesticides. The main thing is if we make it a real effort to eat organic and eat healthy food most of the time, that has to be good enough in reality. And also do an occasional detox. And there's so many products out there that help detox you from toxins. So that's how I work with it. As a matter of fact, on my website, I did a blog on a DDT homeopathic cease therapy detox that I did a few years back, because once I learned a lot about the DDT side effects, I really wanted to get it out of my body. So I did a homeopathic DDT detox, and immediately I felt like crap when I started the detox, which meant it was working. And a few weeks into the detox, when I was at the 200C level, I figured that your audience must know something about homeopathy, but at that point, I thought I was getting flea bites in my body from my dog, but it turned out I was getting the DDT was coming out, and I had over 100 hives on my trunk and my back, my legs, my arms from the DDT. It was actually coming out of my body. That's pretty cool. It's gross, but it was cool. It was actually, after 50-plus years of having this chemical in my body, I was actually, my body was pushing it out, and it was awesome. It really was. It was intense, but it was great. And then 2 weeks later, all the hives were gone. Just overnight, they were gone. So homeopathy is a great way to detox, and cease therapy is an amazing protocol to help with your biotoxins. Also, Zeolite, which is a volcano ash, I take that to help detox from pesticides and other and heavy metals. Then this glutathione IV drips, or you can take glutathione by the pill, by capsules too. But there's many ways. And infrared saunas, where you sweat the toxins out. And that's another reason why exercise is important. We need to sweat too.
Oh, yeah, I do Bikram yoga, and that helps a lot.
Yeah, right. So there's many ways to detox. So, yeah, we live in a very toxic world, but also spiritually, emotionally, I can't worry about everything. So I just have to trust sometimes, too, that I'm doing the best I can. And if you're good to your body 95% of the time or 90% of the time, it can handle the other 5 to 10% of the crap that's coming in our bodies. Yeah.
Do you think that doctors are starting to catch on, to some of these things and some of the harmful effects of the drugs that we talked about earlier, and maybe they should do an amino acid test first before putting them on scary drugs?
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I know I'm in contact with a huge group of holistic doctors in Los Angeles area. They are very aware. But what I found through my experience working with the allopathic Western doctors, they become very defensive when you mention anything alternative.
Right.
They don't even believe in candida. Matter of fact, I know somebody right now going through a real health crisis with dermatitis, fibromyalgia, sinus issues, thyroid issues, and I keep on telling her, you got to get tested for Candida. You have to get tested for Candida, and she can't find a doctor who tests for Candida where she lives.
Right.
Could they just do it with a blood test? Is that how they can find out?
Yeah, that's how they find out. Blood test.
So they don't. There's a test for it, and they don't believe in it. So obviously, it's a religion. It seems like allopathic medicine. We joke about that, and we've actually done a show about it that's coming up about how much of a religion it's come to, and it's very backward, because they say, oh, we need the science to do this and do that, but yet there's a test that they can take, and they don't. They choose not to do it because they don't believe in it. I'm sorry, just the irony.
Yeah. No, and I agree. It's also they want the patients to keep on coming back, so they can keep on, treating them. God forbid they should cure them, and lose that patient. But there's so many people, there's so many toxic, sick people that the patients will keep on coming. It is tragic that these doctors are very defensive, but they've also been brainwashed by their pharmaceutical education.
Yeah.
That's the tragedy. Is that they can't think critically themselves. And also, I think there's a stigma that the American Medical Association will blacklist these doctors who don't prescribe a certain amount of pharmaceuticals or go the holistic way.
Yeah.
So it's
Well, and then you've mentioned Candida a couple of times, and just in case, I know what it is, I'm very familiar, and Virstyne does as well, but just in case our audience doesn't know what that is, can you describe what that is and, what are some of the, you mentioned diet, you use diet to treat it, but can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, well, Candida is an overgrowth of yeast. Women get vaginal infections from too much yeast, which probably most women are common with, particularly if you take antibiotics. Mm-hmm. But Candida is a overgrowth of yeast in the gut, and it affects whatever's happening in the gut is going to affect the brain. So Candida causes something called leaky gut syndrome, where the yeast starts I'm going to say punching holes through the gut, and then food particles get out into the bloodstream, and the blood cells don't recognize the food as something natural, so they attack it, and that starts the autoimmune diseases like allergies. But too much yeast, we all have some Candida, that's normal, but when you have too much yeast, then you develop all kinds of side effects like sinus issues, allergy, low thyroid, low energy, and it affects your brain, because especially with gluten, that's one of the foods that you don't want to eat when you have too much yeast, because it causes brain fog. It's hard to digest, and then it causes brain fog, and so it's not really attention deficit disorder. It's probably a gluten intolerance that's causing the symptoms of ADD. So, and Candida can lead to many serious conditions, such as most cancer, I guess all cancer patients are high in Candida. So, and it's also very common with autism and ADD. So it's really something, if you're having any health issues, any chronic infections, low energy, fibromyalgia. I was talking to a naturopath doctor recently telling me that his fibromyalgia patients always do so much better when they go on an antifungal medication. It starts to clear it up. So Candida causes inflammation in your body.
Right.
So
and it's, I'm sorry, and then the diet aspect of it, because then you mentioned the medications, but they don't always work unless you accompany it with diet. Because I remember one of the first books I read, have you read this one, Deborah? The Yeast Connection by Dr. William Crookes?
Yeah, well, that's a famous book, yeah. That was one of the first books I read. Yes, you have to address the diet, because the diet will and antibiotics will increase the yeast, which is basically a fungus infection. there's actually many good books. That at the beginning of my journey, that was that book when I started doing research, and it's an excellent book. As a matter of fact, Phil Donahue, when he had a show way back when, this is like 5 years before I conceived, they actually had a mother on talking about artificial food coloring and ADD. I remember that show like many years later. Oh, yeah. Why didn't I remember that show when I was feeding my kids this toxic food for breakfast? But as I say, you forget things when you're a mother.
Yeah, but that's interesting. Do you remember what the audience reaction was? I remember Donahue. Okay. So I was just curious, though, were people like accepting of what she had to say, or intrigued, or what?
I remember her talking. I remember she had Jell-O there. It's one of the foods. Don't give your kids anything with artificial food coloring. And I remember, I don't know why I forgot that when my kids were little, but it came back to me much later on.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So as I say, sometimes all your common sense goes out the window when you're, a mother in stress.
When you're stressed, period.
Yeah.
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 So, no, don't worry about it. That was a good insight, though. That was very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so also the suggestions that you make in your book, you talk a lot about your own personal journey, that you researched all this through your children, and then at the end of the book you give a lot of listings of each chapter is kind of a different approach to some holistic healing, and so people just kind of need to poke around and find what works for them.
Right.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. 16 healthcare professionals and some medical doctors contributed chapters to my this book, because I really wanted the book to have credibility coming from the professionals who really deal with these in their practice.
Yeah.
And it was every doctor I asked said yes to really good chapter for them.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. But these are alternative doctors who are very knowledgeable and who have worked quite a bit with these kids. That's why I really wanted to give a really broad overview. Even if my kids weren't affected by all those things, I wanted them to know that there's also these things, too, that you should look at. Don't leave any stone unturned, because most likely if you just try one thing, that's not going to be the answer, as it was in my journey. You have to try many things. And then there's the EMFs, electrical magnetic frequencies fields.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's when a child's sitting in front of a computer or an Xbox or even on cell phones. For kids who are vulnerable, who have issues with detoxing naturally, they're the ones who really get addicted to these computers, because their cells can't detox from the radiation they're being exposed to, and that's the genetic component to autism and these other neurological issues, is that the parents may lack a detox gene, and then the baby doesn't have the detox genes, and those are the ones who get in trouble with the vaccinations.
Right. Absolutely, yeah. We just did a show on that and how certain kids just are completely cannot metabolize at all. But then many of us, can metabolize a little. But then there's an accumulative effect over time, as you mentioned. Like the vaccines were part of it, but then you were toxic yourself, and during the pregnancy, and then they were premature, and so on and so forth. So it's just kind of an accumulation over time. So would you say that your book is specifically geared towards children, or do you think adults can find something for their own healing in that as well?
Oh, absolutely, and that's why I shared my story in there, because I had been chronically ill on and off my whole life, and I'm well now. I'm doing great, and I feel that's because of what I learned through my kids' journey. I became well. So yes, and as a matter of fact, I've had adults read my book and email me and tell me that they did the amino acid panel and it's really helped them. So it's really I think it's absolutely necessary. It's a great book for older people too. It's never too late. You can always improve on the symptoms. You may not be able to cure it 100%, but you can definitely help improve the symptoms significantly by addressing diet and avoiding the flu vaccines. And that's another thing. Adults think they have to get flu vaccines every year. And that's really tragic because the flu vaccines, they really don't work and they're toxic.
Totally.
Yeah.
Don't get me started on the flu vaccine. I have beef with that.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's pretty bad. And so, what do you think about like the possible long-term effects of these prescription drugs have on a person's psychosis or their mental health?
It's not only their mental health; it's their physical health. I was speaking to a cardiologist, and they're preparing themselves for an epidemic of premature heart disease because of a big population of people being on stimulants. And it's not like an antibiotic that you take for 10 days. These kids take these pharmaceuticals for years, and that does cause damage to their heart vessels. It restricts their heart vessels, so they'll have premature heart disease as a result of being on Merlin or any stimulants for long periods of time. And yes, they believe that like Merlin, like these stimulants can shrink the brain, and also antidepressants. There's now studies, and I wrote an article on this as well. I should repost on the effects of antidepressants in pregnant mothers having autistic children.
Mm-hmm.
So that's.
I think there's a class action suit right now, isn't there? There's something like that going on with that as well. Some women, there was a risk of antidepressants in pregnant women, I think.
They should that you should at least wait a year before you get pregnant after you've gone off an antidepressant. But I think also detoxing as well is really critical if you want to make sure you have a healthy baby. Roy Dittman wrote the book, The Brighton Baby.
Oh, yeah.
Really goes into detoxing before you get pregnant. He gives great examples of mothers who end up giving birth to autistic children because they were so toxic with endometriosis, and then they were on the birth control pill, and they never did a detox, and they couldn't get pregnant, and they did artificial insemination, and they tricked the body into getting pregnant, and then she gives birth to an autistic baby because they never addressed the cause of the endometriosis in the first place. So it's
yeah, that was I remember you recommended that book. I still haven't read it yet, but that sounds really, really interesting because I would agree. I think that, it starts in the womb. That's where we want to make sure.
Yeah, and also fibromyalgia is for women who have autistic kids. Fibromyalgia is commonly seen in women who have autistic children. So, and that's, I think, another environmental candida type condition that is being passed to the fetus, and then they're born and they're bombarded with all these vaccinations.
Right.
So it's the perfect storm of
exactly
of toxins. So, but I really try not to be too paranoid because I want to enjoy life.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, and just focus on doing what you love, and just be wise about what you're feeding your family and yourself, and hopefully that will be enough. But it's you just do your best. That's all you can do, and that's what I've done, and it seems to be working.
And how are your boys doing now?
They're doing great. They're healthy, and they're thriving, and they're smart, and I appreciate. I'm so grateful that they're doing as well as they're doing, because the outcome could have been so much worse. And even when they were born with all those issues, it's amazing with how toxic I was with the amalgam fillings and the DDT exposure early on in life, that my kids weren't full-blown autistic when they were born. Being premature, it's like they're miracles that they're doing as well as they are. But I put a lot of work into it, with their diet and detoxing and never allowing them to get amalgam fillings if they do have a cavity, and and I would never get the flu vaccine for them. And they had it twice when they were little before I became aware. But not since then. Since they were in third grade, I think was the last time they got. I think they had the flu vaccine twice, and that was it. But that was too much. As a matter of fact, my son's facial tics increased substantially after he got the flu vaccine. I didn't realize it till later on, but then I thought back and go, that's what did it. Mm-hmm. That's why. So it's the mercury, and it's and even though they say they take the mercury out of the vaccinations, I read that there's still trace amounts.
There is.
They're liars. They lied.
They do. Yeah.
Or they changed it with aluminum, or there are other ingredients that can in the vaccines too that they're liars.
Like formaldehyde.
Yeah. I mean.
Exactly. Yeah. Or the fetal. I mean, like the
diploid tissue, which is
aborted fetal tissue. I mean, just the animal, like viral strands from live animals. It's just gross.
Yeah.
I mean,
and peanut oil. So many children have peanut allergies now, and why are they putting peanut oil in vaccinations when it's not recommended for infants to have any peanut butter when they're little, when they're before a couple of years old? I guess.
That and like honey too. It's one of those foods I know, right?
Yeah. So it makes no sense that they put these toxic ingredients in these vaccinations anyway. But I could go on to be a conspiracy theorist. I have my thoughts about that too. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, we do. I know, it's true. And I think I mentioned that there is a book about the epidemic of peanut allergies, and I think that's what she had connected that. Well, obviously, if you inject someone with peanut oil, their body is going to develop an antibody to that, and so then you have varying degrees of antibody production, so you can have a mild allergy or you can have an anaphylactic allergy. Because some kids, they come into contact, they breathe it through the air, they don't even have to touch it, and they will go into anaphylactic shock. I mean, that's really crazy. And in Israel, I think the same thing is happening, but they're using sesame oil in the vaccines, so everybody's allergic to sesames. And they're having the same type of epidemic type of allergies, responses. So.
What's also tragic too, I know our hour's probably up, but the measles vaccination. Mm-hmm. Whatever happened to us developing our own antibodies and being exposed to these viruses? I know tragically some of these viruses do kill children who get them, but so do vaccinations. And so if a child gets vaccinated for the measles, and then that child grows up, they won't have the natural antibodies for the measles virus to give to their baby offspring.
Right.
So these vaccinations really do a lot of harm down the road as well.
They really do. I know. I mean, we both know that firsthand, and I think we've done a number of shows talking about it, but it's really important. We can't emphasize it enough because the disinformation campaign is so stacked against us in what we're trying to tell people, just saying, look, we saw this, we had this experience with our families, and then when you go and do the research, like we mentioned at the beginning of the show, about the history of vaccination, like with the polio thing, you go, well, maybe we don't even need these things at all, because it didn't even work. That wasn't even the cause of the spike in paralysis issues, and so on and so forth. So once you start going down that rabbit hole, so, but it's true. Yeah, the risk of saying too much, you sound like a conspirator or conspiracy person.
I know. But you wonder, why the fluoride in the water, why the GMO food, you can't wash the pesticide out. And it is a fact that pesticides do cause ADHD. There's no doubt about it. There's numerous studies out there now showing this.
Russell Blaylock put it really well when I heard him say either people that we leave in charge to do these things are really stupid, they're like bumbling idiots, or they know exactly what they're doing because it's just too much, Yeah, it's like the autism study, the vaccination study that was done. I forget the doctor's name, but he was busted. He took off. He was
busted for fraud. He took off millions of dollars from that vaccination study to prove that vaccines don't cause autism.
That was Thorson.
Yeah. And so here's another example of a corrupt scientist doing fake studies. And also the infants that they studied were all healthy infants. So, yeah, maybe healthy kids can handle the vaccinations, but maybe for the short term. But we don't know what the long-term effects are either. There's been a lot of suspicion that the vaccinations can lead to adulthood cancers.
Yeah.
So we really don't know what the long-term effects are of these vaccinations. So a lot to be continued.
Yeah. Absolutely. So before we let you go, though, Deborah, because we are out of time, as you mentioned, remind everybody where they can get a copy of your book and read about what you're doing and all of that.
Well, VictoryOverADHD.com. They can watch my YouTube video on my journey with my children, and also get my book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. A couple of other stores carry the book online. You can order it online through them as well if you have an account with them. But Amazon's probably the easiest way to get access to the book. And and I appreciate it. People go to my website. There's a lot of great resources on there and articles to read, and my blog about how I detox from DDT. I think it's an important information because probably most of us have unsafe levels of DDT in our bodies, and so it may be a smart way to look into getting it taken out. And it's not that homeopathy is so inexpensive. It doesn't cost thousands of dollars. The remedies cost $10 to $20 for each bottle, and so it's very cost effective as well. And it's energy medicine. It works on a very deep level. So anyway, I really appreciate being on your show. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Very
informative.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate
it. Hour with us.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate what you guys do in raising awareness. So thank you so much.
All right. Have a wonderful day.
You have a wonderful rest of your day. The audience, please stay tuned. We're going to take a short break, and when we get back, Virstyne and I will close out the show. But Deborah Merlin, thank you again. And her book is Victory Over ADHD. Check it out.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
I was on holiday with Sir Lawrence Olivier. We had decided that 9/11 was an intelligence operation. We'd all known about JFK. He had so many mistresses. The CIA shot him. Castro could never have done it. It was clear. We had become realists, conspiracy realists. How would we let everyone know was the question. We decided to buy T-shirts that told the contents of our hearts and minds to the world. We went to shop.truthertees.com. Even though the internet hadn't been invented at the time, we went to shop.truthertees.com. There we purchased Conspiracy Realist T-shirts, one of a kind, sold only at shop.truthertees.com. 100% cotton in men's and women's fitted sizes. I won't tell you which one I'm wearing.
Hey, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. We just interviewed my friend Deborah Merlin, author of Victory Over ADHD. And, it was a good conversation because she was able to, it's a good conversation to learn about how you can heal from these things. It's not necessarily a life sentence. It's really amazing. Her boys are adults now, and they're doing great. So
yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And I've known Deborah for a while. She's a really nice lady, and I've known her through the social media and stuff like that. And she's very actively trying to help kids with these types of problems, autism and ADHD and neurological issues. And she's a big, believer of holistic living and holistic therapies and stuff like that. She's very cool.
Yeah,
she's very nice.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love it. I love to hear people's personal stories. I think we're starting to talk about this more often, that people are very, what's the word I'm trying to say? You know, people, we keep kind of make fun of the fact that people like peer-reviewed studies, and or they talk about, they really don't like it. They're full of shit, right?
Right.
Because the stuff that they know, certain medical conditions, is the stuff that they've seen on like Oprah or The View or The Daily Show or Sesame Street, if it's propaganda that's been fed to them since they were kids, or whatever, wherever they got the idea, right?
Right.
And but when people, it's nothing like somebody's personal story to really give you hope and to really give you a fresh perspective on what you've been brainwashed to believe, I believe.
Yeah, and you know what else it is too? I think it. I hope that it reaches out to people who are kind of like afraid to sort of wake up to these things a little bit, because a lot of times when, you know, we hear like Deborah's story about, you know, her children, and she talked about how, you know, she was your typical giving her kids basically crap to eat, you know,
yeah.
But it's like there's such a personal strength, such an inner, to be able to admit that you fucked up, you know, and that you made these errors in judgment as a parent, and as you know, it's not easy to do that. And I think that when you introspect on that and you can admit it, and then you allow yourself to correct it and move on, then it hopefully will give people the strength to say, I made that mistake too, you know, and then they can heal and they can move on. Because a lot of times I think, you know, we talked on the show, it's like people don't want to wake up because they don't want to admit it. They don't want to admit that they were wrong and admit they made mistakes. And, you know, but she had to admit that to help her kids get better, because, you know, she tried to go the mainstream. She tried to have them on medications, and it didn't help. They made them get worse, and then her husband kind of blocked her from doing something, so she was forced into going the other way. And once she did, she went, wow, you know, I really have been doing this the wrong way. I've been kind of making this matter worse. And so she recognized that, you know. And I had to do that myself. I had to recognize, you know, that I made a mistake by letting them vaccinate my kids. I made a mistake by how I was feeding them and stuff at one point, and how I was just, you know, and I mean, and Deborah is a very smart lady. You know, I'm pretty smart. I could have figured it out. I could have figured it out. You know, I could have not. There's no reason I didn't necessarily know. I just, other than that, I didn't, and I just, you know, because I guess we were both fell victim to the disinformation that's out there, you know, about these things, about vaccines and about what real health is and such. And so I like the personal stories, and we've talked to a lot of people who have come on and shared their personal events and things and so it takes sometimes a personal event to wake up and to recognize. But
I really feel more and more that this is what's going to change the world, is people's personal stories. And I think when whistleblowers come out and people come out and talk about the fact that they've healed themselves or whatever, that, you know, they get attacked so much because I think the establishment knows that you know, that's where the real power is. But they want to say that, oh, well, we need a peer-reviewed study, because, you know, I think when Jenny McCarthy came out and started talking about her son, a lot of people actually listened. That's why she was attacked so harshly. You know, if people didn't listen, they wouldn't have attacked her, you know. But people didn't read peer-reviewed studies. I don't know, every show I do, every interview that we're starting to have now, I'm just beginning to realize how much of a fallacy that is, really, of people wanting, you know, peer-reviewed studies or scientific evidence, when really, you know, like I have said before, there are people that you know, that I guess they need that, and there is that out there. But at the end of the day, it's going to be somebody that you know, or somebody that you've heard of that's cured themselves, as opposed to scientists saying, you know, oh, they found the study that, you know, apricot seeds cure cancer. No, it's going to be the dude that you knew that had cancer, that cured himself from cancer by eating the apricots. I'm sorry, if you really think it's going to be a peer-reviewed study, you're full of shit. if you need that, if you need that really maybe to justify to yourself, if you're really left-brained and you need that, fine. Like I said, that is out there too. But then there are people that would say, oh, but there are no studies on that stuff. They're just trying to deter you, you know.
So thank you to Deborah Merlin for being on our show. As I mentioned, her Facebook page is ADHD/Autism Alternative Medicine Resources. Her book is Victory Over ADHD, which you can find at victoryoveradhd.com. So thanks, Deborah, for being on the show today. It was really good to hear your story.
Awesome.
And to hear alternative treatments for what your children were going through. That was great. And we